Hey there, it's Brian Burns. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Today we got Justin Gray, who runs a agency called Lead MD. And he's going to share what he's been learning out there in the market space today in B2B marketing as far as not only technology, but approach, execution. And really, an agency gives us a much broader perspective because they visit many different companies. They see what's working, what's not working, and really focuses in on what is the most effective approach today, both leveraging technology, artificial intelligence, and human intelligence into B2B marketing. But before we do, I want to make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. That's my website, and I have a book on there that's free on how companies make product selection. So it helps both marketing people and sales leaders and their teams understand how companies make those decisions. That's what I spent my whole career doing, working that inside part of the sales process as opposed to just the pitching and the presenting and negotiating. What happens in between those times that you're there and you're not? That's when the real selling happens. And if you don't understand what's going on, then you're missing the whole point. Also, make sure you're checking out nudge.ai and pipedrive.com. These are the two tools that I use to keep track of everything that I do and come up with great ideas on how to get into new accounts and determine who's really in market at the right time and what they're sharing and care about, and how do I connect with them as human beings. And I'll show you exactly how I use these products and others in my course, Start the Conversation, Get the Meeting, which you can find at b2brevenue.com under training. And it's great for demand gen as well as the sales development role and getting into new accounts. Enough about that. Let's get into the interview, and I'll sum up and give you an update at the very end. Hey, Justin, thanks for joining me today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me. So, where to start with myself, right? So I, just almost a decade ago, started what is now Lead MD. Lead MD is a B2B marketing agency that assists with everything from strategy down to tactics, and I think that's really kind of our unique value proposition. We've helped over 3,000 organizations deploy cutting-edge marketing stack and optimize those tools and platforms. So that's pretty much my life encapsulated as well. I love marketing. When I'm not working, I'm writing about work. So I love entrepreneurship and really everything to do with business.
And what made you decide to start your own agency?
Like all good businesses, it was an accident. I was an early employee at a payment startup, grew that organization, acquired an equity stake there, sold that stake, and kind of didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And then a couple different organizations approached me and said, can you kind of build the same sales and marketing tech stack that you built previously? And I said, sure, I'd love to do that in kind of a staff, org or a fractional CMO type manner. And so I took that on for 3 different organizations, and it just kind of grew organically from there. So it truly was an accident and a happy accident.
And you've seen a lot of MarTech stuff change in the last few years, huh?
Sure. Yeah. That's a great thing about MarTech. There's never a dull moment. I mean, What do we have? 6,300 platforms these days on God, I'm going to space whose MarTech landscape that is, but Scott Brinker.
Scott,
it's just a huge amount of technology and tools that are available, and really the role of the marketer has become kind of the curation of those tools. What do I really need to do to make my go-to-market strategy as the most effective that it can be? And I think that's where the best marketers reside. They really are. They're not leaning on technology, but they're leveraging technology, and that's a really difficult and complicated role to play.
And who is your ideal client? How big are they? What stage are they at?
Yeah, so we typically term ourselves as high growth to enterprise. So high growth can be anyone, probably revenues of at least 25 million. They've taken some sort of cash infusion by the way of either PE, VC. And they've got their sights set on becoming a $100 million organization. And then all the way up to your Fortune 100. We've got a lot of large customers like Comcast or Charter that we've helped optimize and utilize some of those kind of more cutting edge marketing technologies in an environment that might be, I don't want to say laggard, but a more traditional environment, a more grassroots marketing environment or branding environment, and they really want to catch up to the latest wave in marketing technology. So anyone that really wants to deploy an enterprise marketing stack, we can help.
And is your focus, mostly on the technology, or is it on strategy, or is it?
Yeah, I think our unique value prop there is that we bridge both of those components. So a lot of agencies out there focus on creating strategies, and they're going to start very high level, and they're not going to get super in the weeds in terms of actually implementing and operationalizing those strategies. We run the full gamut. So we can help someone with that account-based or demand gen go-to-market strategy, help them customize that for their environment, help them formulate their teams and their tech stack around it, and then actually roll up our sleeves and go make that technology work, go train those individuals to really create scale within that environment. So I think actually accomplishing both sides of the house is somewhat of a unique position, and one that we really enjoy.
And what approach are you seeing really work today as far as, is it content? Is it channels? Is it social? Is it account-based?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about marketing is, that you can get caught up in so many of those tactics, right? Like there is no one size fits all. There's no one single bullet that's going to take down that prize buck. It truly is a blend, and it's a really consorted, orchestrated effort. Obviously, account-based is getting a huge amount of attention right now, and rightfully so. But I think really it's a return to value over volume, quality over quantity. And that's the most exciting trend to me in marketing is really the rise of the marketing profession. Whereas marketing has kind of historically been a place where you end up. Yeah. It really is now a desired destination. And we're seeing some really interesting things come about as a result of that evolution.
And that's it, because I think what we used to have to have inbound because we didn't know who our market was, where they were.
Yeah, really easy to pay-per-click, pay-per-lead, and create that volume environment. And quite frankly, we all got hooked on the drug of leads, so deeply. And account-based has really made us look at those benchmarks and the metrics that we're yielding and say, wow, those 10,000 leads we generate every month feel great. Like it feels awesome to bury that needle. But when we look at the conversion rate into even a first conversation, and certainly into an opportunity or a closed won deal, the conversion rate is just abysmal. And so, when you look around at the amount of time, effort, and money that's being put into making these strategies work, you really have to ask the question, are we spending the money in the right area? And that question is probably the most impactful and the healthiest thing that I've seen come about in marketing in a long time.
Yeah. And do you feel that we've kind of hit peak content where when everyone starts doing something, its effectiveness gets diminished?
Yeah, I think that, number one, the concept of a micro trend is very real. Content marketing was something that kind of had a decade run to it, right? HubSpot did a really great job, and CMI did a really great job positioning content marketing as this overarching strategy that we all need to participate in, and that's just what happened. We created so much noise that it's impossible to find good information these days, and the rise of the web and just the availability of speech and the availability of getting your message in front of someone was so accessible that we all abused it, quite frankly. And that's why you see that rise in quality and the focus on quality coming back around is, people want to, not only do they need to see your message, but they need to identify with it in a really emotional way. They need to create trust. They need to understand who you are, believe in your brand, and understand that you have something that can really impact them or their business. That in that sense, content marketing will never die. Getting the right message in front of the right person at the right time is just such a fundamental marketing tenet, and I don't believe that will ever go away. So, but I do think that those kind of micro trends, whether it's Instagram or Snapchat or tomorrow's social media platform, those are kind of the flash in the pan. First person there is going to be the biggest winner. But those life cycles have really started reducing. If you take a look out there, things aren't sticking around for years any longer. They're barely sticking around for months. Augmented reality games and so on. you'll get a flash in terms of those every once in a while here, and suddenly weeks later it's gone. So things are moving really, really quick, and you can either try to play that game where you're trying to stay up with the latest trends and beat everyone to the punch, or you can just focus on quality and understand that the buyer will come to you if you have that one thing that they truly need. So I think that's the much more effective approach. It takes longer, and it's more cost and time intensive, and it really does require an expert to make it happen. But the results from that are just so much more impactful than the quantity game.
So how do you go about that quality? I mean, because you do need that expert who both understands, what you're selling and who you're selling it to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think your second point there is the most critical. Like, you have to understand your buyer at a really fundamental level. Like the quote, like buyer personas is one of those topics where it gets fluffy pretty quickly. And if you take a look at most buyer personas that people have created, they're on a shared drive, or they're on a shelf, or they've been translated into some cutesy representation. Like, there's a local company in town here that makes these big cereal boxes, and the ingredients are what makes up their buyer and so on. I won't name any names, but they're really visible, and they're highly unuseful. So you have to not only understand the buyer at a really deep level, but you have to operationalize that. And I think that's why we've taken the approach that we have with LeadMD, which is it's great to invest that time and go through focus group and go through customer survey and talk to the sales team and just understand everything about this buying committee that is ultimately making a decision around our product or service. But you have to make that that has to live in a system on a day-to-day basis. It has to become a tool that people want to use when they get that inbound interest or someone sends over that referral. They immediately can identify, who is this person? What do they care about? What's the best messaging? Do we have content that conveys that? Where should I meet them? Do they prefer online, offline? Some sort of gradient in between, and really make that useful and operational on a day-to-day basis. And if you understand the buyer, Joe Rowley's famous for saying, "Know thy buyer." I think it's it's a great catchy way to convey a really fundamental principle. And if you know your buyer, you're going to fundamentally understand what it takes for them to build that trust and to make that decision. And then you become that educator and that enabler, rather than someone that is beating them and berating them with a sales message. And that's the absolute key there.
And how do you communicate that to your clients? Because I'm sure when you show up, they don't have that view.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everyone buys into big buzzwordy concepts, right? Like we need buyer personas, and it's best to take a step back. And we find selling through storytelling is always the best way to approach this, which is let's take a look at another customer story or another example of how of, number one, what a buyer persona really means, right? Like what are the makeups of that? How deep does it go? How long do they take to assemble? And then how do they utilize that? And these days with the return to account-based or the return to hyper-personalization, it's really easy and impactful to come up to bring one of those examples to light. Like people are running a lot of highly targeted events, regional events, small number of people, really white glove treatment, and then they're taking a really orchestrated approach to follow up. So if we can show how those personas really led to success, not only in segmenting the database, but getting the right people in the room, meeting those people with, even, food and tchotchkes and gifts and messaging that all align to who they are and what they want as a person, the output is just so much more effective than sending someone an invite to a webinar. And so I think selling through storytelling is just absolutely key.
That's it, because that seems to be the one thing that keeps coming back is those small events that are local, that are high touch, where you put a lot of effort into it. It's not a webinar in person.
Sure. I think the key there is a face-to-face conversation is always going to be your most impactful touch point, right? Like no amount of email or phone calls we have customers that we serve through virtual consulting engagements. And when you compare those to the folks that we've actually gone out and seen, like the number one, the revenue that we take in is 3 to 4x higher on accounts where we've developed that one-to-one, that in-person relationship. And it makes total sense. I mean, it's so obvious, it's almost painful, right? Like when you form a relationship, everything is better. Think about your personal life. When you get out there and you see a friend that you haven't seen in a long time and you make that concerted effort, like that friendship is going to thrive versus someone that you haven't talked to in 10 years and you barely see them on Facebook and it's just kind of a passing acquaintance at that point. When you make the investment in fostering that relationship, it's going to yield tenfold.
And what type of time investments are you having your team make into technology? What are you seeing out that's exciting and you think is really going to percolate in the next 3 or so more years?
Yeah, I think in terms of technology, like the old staples still apply, right? Like no one is really, I can't say I've ever met an organization that had just nailed CRM. CRM still tends to be one of those things where, well, we got to put the data in because someone is, browbeating us over. Yeah, exactly. There's so much opportunity there to really enable someone's day as a result of making that streamlined and doing things like, once you've entered the data, suggesting content you might send out to that account and so on. So I do think that, it makes a lot of sense to focus on the fundamentals. Still, everyone gets excited by new technologies. I think things like Drift are just really impactful in giving, again, the buyer what they want. If someone's on our site and they want to ask us a question. So here's an example. Like, obviously, we deal in a lot of MarTech and B2B technologies. And sometimes people just come to our site and they want a simple answer. They couldn't find it anywhere on a chat board or a forum or a user library or anything like that. Like they just want an answer. Hey, I've got this issue in maybe Marketo, and I just want to come to LeadMD's site and ask them a question around it. Like someone should be able to do that, and we should be able to answer that question. And that's really an investment in inbound down the road. If we answer enough of those questions and we become a resource for our buyer, eventually, when they hit a sticking point or they need a new piece of technology implemented or they want to embrace a new go-to-market strategy, we're going to be top of mind when they realize that pain. And so I think all of those, anytime that you can engage the buyer in their environment, on their timeline, that's a great piece of technology. And that's why I love something like a Drift.
And that's it, because I've had David on the podcast before,
yeah.
and we talked about that because when you go to most websites, or even if you click on an AdWords and you don't scroll down to actually go to the website directly, here they spent what $3 to $5 to have you come visit, and what do they put up? A light box immediately for you to enter in your tax return before you get anything.
Yeah, I mean, people want low friction. They want high value.
Right.
And that's what your buyer wants, you have to give to them. And so there's always that discussion. This happens with clients quite a bit, especially in relation to content strategy, like gating and forms and so on. Like the way of the form is truly going away. The only time that we should be asking someone to fill something out is where we're going to use that information to customize their experience. And I think that your modern buyer understands that. When you give them the opportunity to pick the type of content that they want to receive and what's the frequency and what problems are you struggling with, and if you give us this info, we'll customize our outreach to you based upon that, and hopefully what we present to you will be something that you can actually use. I think people see the value in that. You don't get many chances to fulfill on that brand promise. So you have to get it right, but I think that's a fair exchange, and today's buyer is willing to make that exchange.
And that's it. And if you apply the technology to it, because you can, reverse engineer the IP address.
Totally.
Right. You really need their corporate email, and from that you could probably populate all kinds of information about them. I think that's where technology, is best used, right? Like it's best used augmenting a process that is painful. Whether that's, smoothing out an operational process and making it scale, or doing something like you're talking about where you're filling in the gaps that when you ask the buyer those pieces of information, they get annoyed by it, right? Like, so let's not just cram it down their throat. Let's leverage technology to fill in those gaps so that we can get what we need, and the buyer can get what they want. And I think that's the best
best case utilization of technology out there is when you're solving for those joint buyer and seller problems.
And it seems so obvious, yet, I remember 10, 15 years ago, I go, just get their corporate email. I can figure the rest out. When I was a rep. And they go, no, we need their address, their first name, date of birth.
Yeah, we need the address so we can assign it to the right rep, right? It's like, dude, like the buyer does not care who calls them back. They want that person to be knowledgeable. They want them to answer their questions and to give them something that they couldn't get by simply reading a web page or a brochure. So, put your time and effort towards educating your reps and really getting them to focus on being a customer success agent versus just a sales rep, and don't focus on hey, we need your zip code so we can round robin this correctly.
And how about like the transparency that's kind of emerged in the last 3 years with, the review sites, that there is no hiding anymore?
Yeah. I think when you look at where we've come from, considering like a decade ago, like to get pricing, you had to jump through every hoop in the building. Nowadays, pricing that's something that people expect. They expect to understand who you are as a business. They expect to understand what your company culture is like. They expect to go look at your Glassdoor reviews and your G2 reviews and your Google reviews and so on. And that's out there for everyone to consume. That's how we build trust. Like we've said, this social proof is incredibly important to us. And when you look at how people buy in their personal lives, it makes total sense this has crept into business because people want to feel good about the brand that they're engaging with. I mean, look at the stories where, a big corporate brand does something really stupid and suddenly, they've alienated all of their buyers. Like that's matriculated down to the mom and pop business and the small business around the corner. People want to know that when they're spending that dollar, that not only are they going to get a good and service that is worth the dollar, but the company's going to put that dollar to use doing something good. It's going to be impactful. It's going to be something that benefits the society as a whole. And that's where we've gone as a country and as buyers, right? Like we want to understand that this organization is going to do good with whatever we're giving to them, and that's really important to some people. So we as a business have to acquiesce to that need, and we either embrace it or we alienate it. And if we alienate it, it certainly doesn't turn out well for us.
And do you see a future for like a marketing AI agency? People that are really focused on leveraging, just the cutting edge of data about who's in market.
Yeah, so we've lit up a data science division. So yeah, absolutely, I do. We're investing in it. I think the big problem there is again, like data is the absolute key to that. Like my decision is only as good as my data. And if you ask 10 marketers, the state of their data, 10 of them are going to say, I've got a data problem. My data sucks. And so that's the really unsexy fundamental area that we need to be putting our effort towards, which is just better data in B2B. To your point earlier, if we're going to ask for that corporate email address and that's all we're going to ask for, we really need to have a good data governance strategy, augmentation, standardization, appending different data points and so on. And we have to hold the completeness of that data record up really high and say this is our standard. And we're not just going to let a bunch of crap in the database. We're not going to buy these lists and just let anyone import them and hope for the best. We really have to take a good look at the fundamental data that we're collecting and also the behavioral and the insights that we can gather based on these people's online movements or even their engagements with us offline. And that's where I see the biggest gap in the ability to embrace AI, which is a lot of times we can know what web pages someone visited and what emails they opened and the webinar they attended, but we don't have a really good way to capture those offline conversations. They stopped by our booth, but what did we talk about? How did that phone call go? How did that interaction with the customer success rep go? All of that information needs to get into our system as well. And then we really need to get an advanced methodology around creating a 360-degree view of that customer. What do they want? How do they behave? and then respond in kind with, again, right messaging, and then see how they consume that messaging. It really is something that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And that's where I'm concerned about the ability for AI to really be effective based on the state of data today. We've got to focus on our data right now if we expect to use it in a meaningful way tomorrow.
But I mean, we're getting there, don't you think? That
the technology is certainly getting there. I would argue that data collection and governance strategies have really not changed that much in the last decade, and I think that's the one lagging part in certainly B2B is that people really need to start investing in stewarding that data rather than just adding more fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
And that's still the strategy of a lot of B2B marketers, which is, acquire as much, buy as many lists, attend as many shows, bring as much into the database as possible, and then spam the hell out of it. And that's really where we're going to run into some issues when we try to make some predictable data models based upon that data and then ultimately decision around it. We have to solve for that kind of laissez-faire database management. And
let's say, what is the exact process that you take people through? Is it your focus on technology? Is it trying to get them up to date and where things are going?
Just in relation to data, or just the entire process?
More on the data side, because that part is hard, because everybody wants a copy instead of trying to leverage all these resources out there.
Totally. Yeah, again, you have to start with the buyer. We have to understand who our best customers are, who are the buying roles and committees at that organization, and what are the important data points for us to capture. Like, some of those are going to be no-brainers, right? Like firmographic information. Yeah, we need to know where people are located. We need to understand who they are, what they do, how much revenue they're bringing in. A lot of those baselines, I mean, that's a D&B contact card, right? But then you start to go above and beyond that. Like, what data points really make them a great customer for us? So, like, in our environment, if you've purchased a marketing automation platform, let's say you purchased Marketo, that's super important for us to understand. And so that technographic dimension is part of our database. We need to keep that clean going forward. If you move off of Marketo and you move on to Oracle, we need to know about that change. The data that change is important to us. So your ideal customer really starts to dictate the data points that you need to collect and hygiene over time. And once you've developed kind of that complete picture, like, hey, here's the 150 fields that we need to keep up to date no matter what, then you have to bring your data augmentation strategy in line. Like, how am I going to deal with job changes? The average marketer changes jobs every 14 months. Yeah. That's a difficult cycle to keep up with. We need to solve for that. The average marketing team buys technology every 2 months. Like, how do I understand that technographic footprint and when it changes? And then once I've got a really good consorted strategy around data acquisition and hygiene, then I have to start consuming insights around that account as well, right? Like, I need to understand when they've gotten funding. I need to understand when they've got a CMO change. I need to understand, what's changing in their industry that's important to them. All of that starts to kind of make up that data footprint around our ideal customer profile. So I always coach our customers to start there. Like, if you haven't invested in creating that data profile, account profiles, buyer personas, and then the relevant account planning exercises that really take place on a weekly basis, that's where we need to start. And then we can start operationalizing this stuff. Where does it live? What are the different technology vendors and data vendors that we're going to employ to keep this data clean, and then ultimately message to these buyers and so on. But it really, I guess if I were to boil that all down, it starts with account segmentation. And again, that's a really unsexy topic, and most people want to know, like, hey, can I just go out and buy this AI platform to predict where my next best customer is? It's like, okay, let's assume that were true. Let's assume we could go buy a platform that would just spit out a customer. Like, we still need to manage and message and educate and foster that customer over time. And so if we don't know, what data points we're going to collect to understand how happy they are, how they're using the system, like, we're still going to be dead in the water. We're going to lose that customer. So even if we did have a magic box that spit customers out, we need to retain those customers. We need to increase that lifetime value. And again, that requires a really intentional data collection and stewardship strategy. So for me, it's all about data.
Cool. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Where do people go to learn more about you, your company, and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Check out leadmd.com. Go to our best practices area. I like to say we give away more best practices than our competitors have. So, put me to the test on that. I'd love to connect on Twitter as well. I'm at jgraymatter, and LeadMD is at myleadmd.
Hey, Justin's a great guy. He really knows his stuff. I really enjoy talking with agency owners, people who have bootstrapped their way up and really have to earn and keep clients by producing. That's critical. And, these agencies, they have, very broad and deep experience from very different client bases. So check him out on LinkedIn and check out LeadMD. Also, I want to make sure you're checking out the show notes where you're checking out our partners at gong.io and discover.org. They're doing great research on what's working today as far as both data and the conversations about sales. They've teamed up and have done a great job on a ebook that I think you'll really enjoy about how do you get people from that B player to an A player? What's the difference there? What are the steps to go through? And those sales conversations, that's really where things are happening. Actually, when you're talking with somebody, because any of us and all of us know when you put something out there, it can be misinterpreted now and then. And what we have to do is be able to converse with people, have them understand really what we're talking about and how it will affect them. Also, check me out at b2brevenue.com. I got my ebook there. Just register there or come over to LinkedIn. I'll accept every connection. Love to see you. And if you see some of my content on LinkedIn, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a little like, a comment, or a share. I'd appreciate that. And check out the training for your team about how to really connect with people today, because the email ain't doing it no more. Cold calling, it's not as easy as you thought. People just aren't picking up the phone anymore, and they're deleting your emails. So there's got to be a better way. And yeah, social's good, but what we got to remember is that people are human beings. We want to make them personas, and that helps us with generalization and segmentation and understanding what we should focus on. But at the end of the day, we've got to talk with people. We've got to engage with them. And that has changed. And how we do it hasn't changed, but where we do it and the steps that we go through, we have to do it differently. We can't just do it all in one email or one voicemail or all in one post. We have to build that up over time. So that's what I teach. So check that out at b2brevenue.com. Connect up with me on LinkedIn. Make sure you have the sales team check out the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. I'm on Instagram at Brian G. Burns and over at YouTube at Brian Burns Sales Podcast. So check it all out. Thanks for listening.